what if we launch our brand at New York Fashion Week, just do it guerrilla style? We found a bunch of models on Craigslist. I think it was like -10 degrees or something. And we put the models in bikinis and our sandals. We drove them to the shows. We rugged them up and then we'd blast music. They had like beach balls they were playing with and they'd throw off their coats. And then all of a sudden it was this like sunny fashion show in the middle of the cold winter. And the photographers were going wild and there were just like walls of paparazzi.
But then it really didn't result in very much clicks. So what we ended up doing was creating a video.
And press just love that because it's so easy for them.
It's totally true. You've got to think like you're a journalist.
The Huffington Post posted that on their whole front page of their website.
I'm absolutely thrilled, beyond thrilled to have both of you on the podcast today because over here at SheCom, pretty much my whole team, we all super crush on you guys and your story. And I'm really excited, as I know our listeners will be, to unpack some of the really cool things that make up the TWOOBS story and obviously your story and how it all interrelates. So welcome firstly to the podcast. It's amazing to have you here.
Thank you. We're super excited to be here.
Yeah,
epic. Let's dive into the story. Now, I don't even really know where I'm going to start because I have a whole bunch of questions in front of me and I know this convo is something I'm super excited about, but I will start with the Byron Bay piece. So you guys opened your first Byron Bay store, a bricks and mortar store, which a lot of brands do in Byron, but I want to know like why bricks and mortar and why Byron and what is after this for you guys in terms of more bricks and mortar?
Oh, you know, we ask ourselves these questions all the time. We don't even know. Well, so I moved to Byron, me being Stef, 4 years ago in the pandemic, and we'd always dreamed about bricks and mortar. I think that we just love the idea of being able to physically meet customers, and as much as we love online, there's something a bit more romantic about having an in-store experience for the brand.
And we'd done a lot of pop-ups in the past and they'd always done really well for us.
Yeah, we'd done a few in Chapel Street, South Yarra in Melbourne. We'd done one in Bondi in Sydney. We'd done one in the city in Melbourne as well. So when I moved to Byron, we were like, well, this is kind of perfect because it's a little bit summer and holiday year round in Byron. So maybe that holiday pop-up vibe that we'd created in Melbourne and Sydney around the Christmas time, we could open in Byron and kind of have that same idea. It didn't really end up working like that.
I think, which we'll get into in a sec, but what I wanted to point out as well, which I actually think was very clever in terms of us choosing Byron, which is that in Melbourne, particularly where we had always done pop-ups, the population there is quite stagnant. Like if you're there, it's probably because you live there. And so every year we'd have these different pop-ups, but we'd always be dipping into the same group of people. So we loved about Byron that it's so much more transient that we'd be able to dip into a larger group of people from the one place, which definitely does stand. Like we have people that shop in the store from all over Australia and all over the world, really. But as Stef's about to tell you, it hasn't been all rosy.
No, it definitely.
Yeah, so tell us. I personally love a lot of the stories of the Byron brands that originated, you know, the Kavaris and the Spells and the Arnhems, and I think there's a lot of love for everything you've just said. I think people come to Byron also for the brands that are sold in Byron like this. And I do want to say I'm super keen to hear about, you know, in terms of profitability and what didn't go well. But I do want to just reframe something you shared. And it goes for all our listeners, whether it's your own bricks and mortar store or whether it's actually going to a trade fair or even a retail fair where you get to speak to people, pop-ups, markets. The real value in all of those is that you get to interact with people who are touching and feeling your product. And I'd love to know from you guys, my thought process is that it's incredibly valuable to see what they think when they look at it, what colorways they want, you know, whether they think it's too expensive, is it too light, is it too heavy? Like that kind of feedback is really difficult for online brands to get. So has that also been part of your experience? Has it really been valuable for you guys in terms of future planning?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because the team is in Melbourne and our store is in Byron. And I think what you're saying is definitely part of what we love about the in-person experience. And I think that doing pop-ups and doing markets, we really have that experience that you're speaking about. We get to meet the customers. We get to hear about what they're loving. They get to touch things. They get to try them on. That's really valuable. And that's something we love about an in-person experience. I think it's funny because we're just honest people and you're catching us in the middle of a really tough time with our Byron store. So we're not going to sugarcoat and be like, it's so fantastic when
we're learning so much. It's like, yeah, we're learning what not to do by doing lots of wrong things.
Yeah. And I think just
right, because they're different businesses, right? Like we've got a lot of women in the she-com community that are bricks and clicks, and a lot of them come to us that are yeah, that's it. That are bricks only, right? And so when you have a brick store and then you start to open a click store, they are fundamentally completely different on every level. And there's an assumption because the product's the same that it'll be easy and it's the same strategies, and it's just not.
I think you've nailed it. That's what it's been for us.
And it's really interesting as well because we actually had an amazing mentor come through the store a couple of weeks ago, and she was basically saying to me, like, you haven't told me the story of the brand. Like, you've created a beautiful aesthetic experience, but it's almost like you expect everyone who's coming into the store to already know all the stories you've told online about TWOOBS. But that's not the person that's shopping in our Byron store. The person that's shopping in our Byron store is just stumbling across a store that looks pretty. And then they arrive and there's, you know, for example, like, when we built the store, we built it with the environment in mind. So the walls are made out of 100% recycled plastic, and there's a curtain in there that's made from recycled hotel toweling, but it doesn't say it anywhere. So she's like, it's awesome that you went to all the effort to do that, but you're not telling the customer. So you're almost not able to reap the rewards of what that would mean to them.
And I think that the biggest lesson that I would pass on to somebody else thinking about this is at a certain size, which, you know, we're a pretty decent sized business right now. We're eight full-time staff members, and at the size that we're at or smaller, I would say bricks or clicks. Maybe if you're bricks, you know, it makes sense to have a small online presence, but for us, we can really see how online is where we could grow this business so much bigger. We're experiencing so much growth for so many less overheads without needing the team growth. And to have this store at the size that we're at, we can see where the merit would be if we hired, you know, if we doubled our team size and we really had people focusing on this. But it is two different things, and we've been really conscious not to dilute the resources away from our online store that is, you know, our flagship. Like, the revenue that we do at our Byron store on an amazing day doesn't touch the sides of an amazing day on our online store. So I think it's been clever of us that we haven't diluted that, but then we've seen how a bricks and mortar store does need a whole lot of love. And a drawback we've had with picking a really transient place is staff are really transient because people are constantly coming and going. So we haven't had a solid store manager for the last few months, and that's one of the teething issues that we're working on at the moment. And because we're a small team, it's then taking resources from the team to have to find somebody new and kind of cover that themselves in the store.
Like, I love this conversation so much right now because so many women find it attractive to think, I'll just pop a brick store in. And I think it's really valuable, every piece of what you're sharing with us right now. I would question, I suppose, how profitable it could be too, because Byron rents are high and staff wages in Australia are also high, especially in a transient location where you're constantly having to train new people to know how to do stuff. You don't get the solidarity of training people and then having them really freaking good at their jobs, because they do churn really quickly in a transient location like Byron. And I think for all those reasons, I really love that you're actually questioning it. I do think the one downside to an e-commerce store is that people can't touch and feel the product. But the upside, if we look at it, is that you can storytell on an e-commerce store in a way that you can't in a brick store. So I suppose, like all business transactions, there's pros and cons to everything. And I think everything about this conversation is getting my girl geek going.
Yeah, I do think as well, like in terms of a marketing strategy, because that is really the way that we looked at the store. We never thought it was going to make us bazillions of dollars or move a lot of product. It is really... it's a marketing strategy for us. And I don't know if like this is just still me being like fantasy about it, but I do see the potential in it and I do see how it could be amazing. So look, like we opened the store a year ago. We'll give it another crack for a year. And then if we're still having these same feelings this time next year, maybe it will be a different story.
You know, one thing I do think having a brick store is amazing for is content creation. I don't know if you guys are working on this or nailing it, but some of the bricks and clicks clients that we work with, they really heavily use their brick stores for content creation. So for, polling clients about what they like about it or creating reels or just like, I suppose it's almost like a permanent studio that you can create content about your product. So I think that would probably be one more thing in its opportunity. But maybe what I'm hearing is you're not rushing out to sign Westfield leases across Australia anytime soon.
Yeah, definitely right.
Definitely a different business model. So I want to hark back a little bit. I know we've had the benefit, Jess, of talking to you on stage at SheCom Live recently, and you shared a really interesting story, and you probably get sick of talking about it, but to all our listeners, they'll be fascinated. Tell us about your New York Fashion Week launch back in 2016. And once we've talked about that, just to set the context for the listeners, we're going to talk a little about, you guys have shared that your first few years in business were quite slow. And I know that for many business owners, they get really stuck in the slow period, and it's difficult sometimes to find the nous to pull yourself through a few years where it doesn't seem, not everybody else believes in what you're believing in or gets it really quickly. So I want to talk about your launch, but then talk about like, why was it slow for a few years, and then what did you do to shift it?
I might let Steph talk about the New York Fashion Week story because I have told it recently at SheCom.
Sure, I'm happy to take this one. So Jess and I were traveling around the world a lot as bloggers at the time that we launched TWOOBS 8 years ago. We were blogging under the name How to Live, and it was kind of the sister brand to TWOOBS that we were launching off the back of. And we were going to be traveling to New York Fashion Week, and we knew that between shows, photographers just kind of stand around a lot of the time with nothing to do. And bear in mind, this was the very early days of Instagram. So nowadays when you go to Fashion Week, there's a lot going on all of the time and it's very hard to stand out. So we came up with this idea that to launch at New York Fashion Week as a brand in New York Fashion Week can cost $500,000 to $1 million. And we were like, what if we launch our brand at New York Fashion Week and we just do it guerrilla style? And so we found a bunch of models on Craigslist. We hired a driver. We put the models, it was the middle of winter, so I think it was like negative 10 degrees or something. And we put the models in bikinis and our sandals, and we drove them to the shows and like rugged them up. So we drove them to the shows, we rugged them up, and then in between the shows, when the photographers were standing around, we would get them to stand outside, we'd blast music. They had like beach balls they were playing with and things like that. They'd throw off their coats. And then all of a sudden it was this like sunny fashion show in the middle of the cold winter. And the photographers were going wild. Like we had videos that we took of it, and there were just like walls of paparazzi, and it was all over social media. And it was just like the most amazing way to launch the brand. And it actually, we ended up getting it. The Huffington Post was one of the biggest news sites at the time. And the Huffington Post posted that on their whole front page of their website was like this activation that we'd done. So yeah, it was pretty scrappy of us, and it was a really fun way to launch the brand.
And what I shared as well at the conference was kind of the BTS of what that process actually looked like, which is that, we were really excited by like the in-person reception of it. Like people were taking photos and excited and asking about what this was. But then it really didn't result in very much in the way of clicks. And also we were hoping to get press on it, which no one was really super interested in, just to be totally honest. So what we ended up doing afterwards was creating a video, which like literally makes us sound ancient, because now if you were doing something like that, all you would be doing was the videos. But for us, that was quite innovative. And so we created a video after the fact using like old footage that we had on Snapchat, and also like dressed up in our mum's house when it was actually summer outside. But by that point we were at home in Australia and acting like, we were rugged up in coats, being like, oh, we're outside New York Fashion Week. And really pieced the story together and told the story for them, which was an amazing learning for us because...
Yeah, that was when the journalists really picked it up. That was when we got the Huffington Post. That was when people started to actually, want to write about it and want to talk about it. And it was actually about 3 months later. So that was a huge learning for us because it was like, we knew this amazing thing was there, but we learned like how to tell a story and the way that you communicate things is the difference between nobody caring about it and everybody caring about it.
And it's interesting when you say it was a few months later, because I remember the initial feedback we got from press was like, New York Fashion Week ended yesterday. This isn't news anymore.
And here we go 8 years later, still news because we told that story.
Yeah, like if you tell a story in a right way, it doesn't matter if it happened yesterday, today,
timeless.
Or 16 years ago.
Yeah. It's so true. And I think the lesson in that is the act of the storytelling piece. And I think for media, like my experience is the more you can piece it into a story that's ready to tell, the easier it is to get publicity because it makes their job easier. And sometimes if it's a concept, they can't grasp it. But if you can feed them the pieces in a way that tells the story.
Absolutely.
I do love...
Can I just add there? When we've worked with PR agencies, we've always been blown away by how easily they will just plant a story with the press. When we're trying to get press on our own as a brand, we'll often be trying to be really subtle and we'll be like, hey, like, here's this product, maybe you'd like it. And we just see them barge in and they'll just like write a whole article and send it to press. Or they'll be like, these are the coolest shoes ever. And these are 4 other cool shoes that you could write about. Here's the whole story. And press just love that because it's so easy for them to literally just like pick that up and drop it in. And so actually, like, while it can feel pushy as a brand, the more you feed to them, the more you tell the story, the more you give them, the easier it is for them and the more likely they are to pick it up.
It's totally true. You've got to think like you're a journalist. And if somebody drops an easy job in your lap, you're far more likely to say yes. I love that. I do think, and you probably haven't heard this story, you guys, in a flip, but one of our podcast episodes that has just gone live is actually with one of our clients, Aisha from Full Bum Swimwear. And she's just done recently the Miami Swim Week. So I suppose, a much smaller but similar concept to a fashion week somewhere overseas. And for swimwear, Miami makes sense. Cost her, it was a paid spot to get a runway, cost her a bit of money, but it didn't involve getting any more sales on her e-commerce store when she got back, but she did actually pick up a shit ton of media from it. They loved the idea of, Aussie runways, brand makes it to Miami Fashion Week or whatever. And I think often in these kind of more guerrilla style marketing, and that was a paid one. Yours would have cost you money because you had to get to New York with models, etc. There's always a cost involved, but they're more guerrilla than they would be of having to pay to be part of New York Fashion Week. I love them because it's often what comes off the back of that thinking that brings the gold. And I think for a lot of women thinking outside the box, it would be so easy as a brand just to keep giving Mark Zuckerberg your money every week. But I love the idea of doing things that are a bit more guerrilla and innovative and eye-catching. And it won't always be the instant, you don't just grab a whole bunch of new e-commerce sales, but it's the things it leads to I always love to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's a balance, right? Like you got to give Zuckerberg some money, unfortunately. And
unfortunately.
That's what we learned was that until we started running paid social ads, we weren't actually seeing sales. We're much better innately at brand and building brand. So we do sadly hand over a lot of money to Zuckerberg, but we also balance it with a lot of brand placement, product placement that just slowly in the background builds the brand. So for example, and I guess it depends on the product, but for us, we often get asked by fashion brands every single Melbourne and Sydney Fashion Week at the very least if they can have some product for the runway. And we never get anything direct out of it, but we're usually in 1 to 3 shows each time. And it's just little things that chip away in the background. Often the brands will send us really cool pictures with, their swimwear or their outfits or whatever with our shoes. And we never see sales from it, but we keep doing it because it's, you've got to do all of those little brand building pieces as well. And then you've got to do the things that drive sales directly. And I think having those 2 strategies in tandem is what's really helped us to grow a brand that people know and love and that actually sells things.
I love that. And I think getting your shoes in the fashion weeks in a slightly different way is really valuable for credibility. So if it was me, I don't know if you do this, but I would be capturing every Vogue or, Women's Weekly or whoever's featuring it wouldn't be Women's Weekly, you know what I'm trying to say, any media that feature the model wearing that brand's outfit, but with your shoes in it, and then featuring that back on your website. And for a lot of the ladies who are certainly in the earlier stages of building a brand, we talk a lot here at Shecom about the credibility piece and how important it is. And I think what you've just said isn't just sales directly, it's the credibility and authority, it's the brand building and the brand messaging that can sit behind then the ability for them to say yes, because as we just literally talked about with bricks and clicks, in clicks they can touch and feel a product, and they also use all their senses. They can engage, their touch and their hearing and their eyesight and their smell and all the senses are engaged. But on a website, we've only got one sense, which is our eyesight, and we have to make a decision about whether to buy or not based on using only one of our senses. And so often people are really skeptical or dubious when they go to buy on a website, because one sensory only engaged means that we assume there could be some kind of scam here, or what if this website's no good, or what if the product's crap. And for anyone who's listening who's found themselves in a situation of low website conversion, those pieces of authority that Jess and Steph just shared are so valuable to lift your credibility as a product label, so that people know that it's safe to pull their credit card out, because you must be good because you were on the runway, being worn alongside household brand names. Those kind of things are so important. I agree.
Yeah, the other thing that we did a few years ago that really helped us to build our credibility was we kept noticing that when we would talk about we have this shoe brand that's online, people would be like, oh, cool, and where's it stocked? And it was hard to communicate to people that, no, we don't want it to be stocked anywhere. It's cool that it's online. And we actually identified that we could partner with some retail partners to add credibility. So we ended up getting them stocked in David Jones. We were on the Iconic, and we were in some smaller stores like Platypus and Glue Store. And that was not a really successful sales channel for us. We were never interested in the margins. When we were looking at the margins we could make with them versus what we could do online, we really didn't want to scale it there. But it was a really clever way of building credibility. I think we was probably stocked with them for around 2 years. And then for that period, people were like, where are you stocked? And we were like, David Jones. And they were like, oh, okay, you're a legit brand. I get it. And now we can, if people say, where are you stocked? We say, well, we were stocked in these places, but we actually chose to do this, which adds even more credibility. But that's definitely that was definitely a really clever strategy that we used, that even though our dream was always D2C, it was a really nice stepping stone for us.
Completely agree. And it just ties perfectly into that authority piece. I think that's what people are looking for, the credibility. But you've just brought up two things for me. I do want to come back to what are the levers that got you guys out of slow growth to moving quickly. But you've also touched on another question I have around wholesale. And you made a decision, obviously, to get into wholesale for a while for credibility, but then out of it. So I'd love to know, firstly, why did you exit wholesale and stick to your own D2C and, well, obviously, through your bricks and clicks now? What was that decision? And then let's go back to the going into retailers after that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you said it before about the difference between bricks and clicks, they're two different businesses. For us, going into wholesale was like starting a whole new business. No one in our team knew anything about wholesale. We didn't have any experience in it. And honestly, they speak a different language. I mean, now if I was to go into those meetings, I would say, can you please stop using so many acronyms? I've never done this before. But at the time, Steph and I would have to write the acronyms down and then leave the meeting and Google them after the fact, it's literally a completely different language. Even the way that they like to receive stock, we would have some of these brands, they'd be like, oh, we want to receive the stock between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. And we're like, okay, great. And then we get a call being like, well, we've had to reject the stock because it got here at 12:30. So it's just a completely different thing. And I would say we were in way over our heads in the beginning. It was a very steep learning curve. We didn't realize how much time, energy, and resources it actually requires to be good at it, and the margins that you need to be able to work to in order to actually make that work. is quite alarming. So, Stephanie and I would get this big order from David Jones and be like, awesome, like thousands of shoes, epic. And then one day we actually sat down and we looked at the numbers of like, what does this actually mean to our bottom line though? And by the time we factored everything in, we were selling so many more shoes, but really it wasn't making a difference that significantly to our bottom line. And so more and more as we started to focus on the environment and look at the ways that like the fashion industry was feeding into the climate crisis, it just began to make no sense. I think we really had the inclination that we didn't like this way of doing business. It's not that nice, to be totally honest. Like the big guys, they really take advantage of the little guys in that kind of in that segment of the industry, in our experience anyway.
Yeah, and it wasn't just that you would need to sell them your product at really, really low prices. It was also that they would discount it whenever they wanted. They would ask you for money to market the product through their channels. That one really blew our minds. Like if you've worked in wholesale, you know that. But if you haven't, you don't realize that retailers require you to pay them for marketing.
Some of them even give themselves a discount if they pay you within like 60 days. It's like, why do you get a discount? You're not even paying me in advance. You're actually paying me 60 days after the fact that you decided that you get a discount. Like it's actually crazy that we even let them get away with this.
It's mind bending. And I everything you're saying, I completely agree with. And I just want to share for a second how relevant what you're saying is for a conversation around, is it a match for your business ethos? But, I had Eco Originals, which is a big eco nappy brand, and we pitched to Coles and Woolies. And I found them so excruciatingly painful to prepare for a pitch because they give you no information whatsoever about what the pitch should contain. But like everything you just shared, they have all these, short 3-letter codes or words. I had no idea what they were talking about. I didn't even know what margins we needed to pitch to them. So that lack of information makes it really difficult to do a compelling pitch to them. But secondly, in our situation, in our category for nappies, because it's so competitive against Kimberly-Clark being Huggies as their main shelf space winner, they were like, okay, so Kimberly-Clark are going to come hard at you and you're going to need to be on sale 50% of the year. That's week on, week off through the whole year. And by the way, if your RRP is, let's go with $13 a bag, we want you half price, but the half price doesn't come off our margin. You still pay us the same. All the half price comes off yours. And secondly, we want you to put about 150 grand a year into being in our catalog. Like that's marketing costs, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm like trying to do the numbers and I just got a fuck no when it came to like that entire conversation. That wasn't why I started the business. So I think it's a really relevant piece to consider. However, I do want to flick back to something else you just shared around, like maybe more the David Jones or Iconic, or one thing I did work out for us at Eco Originals, it was not the Coles or Woolies approach because they're the really big arsehole giants, in my opinion. We went more the mid-tier, maybe some pharmacy chains, some whole food chains. We were in about 350 stores across Australia with wholesale accounts. And I agree with you from the perspective that for us, that was kind of cost neutral. We worked out we didn't really have any margin left after we paid for shipping and salespeople and all of that kind of stuff. However, what we got from it was massive brand representation. It was essentially a marketing cost for us is how we viewed it. It's two core things that I loved about it. And I think our listeners need to consider this in this whole conversation about to wholesale or not to wholesale. One is its marketing. So you're getting shelf space in places that new consumers can find you that maybe have never found you before. Now, in a nappy category, that's a super repeat purchase. Maybe for shoes, it's a little bit different, but for us, we wanted them to find us once and then go back to our online store and continue to purchase from us. So it was a marketing cost. But secondly, one piece that does exist is that the more stock you can turn over, the more buying power you have with your manufacturers. And sometimes getting more stock pushed through, even if it isn't super profitable, but you're still placing bigger orders, that allows you to have more buying power with your manufacturers to push for a better relationship, better buying power, better rolling deposits, whatever it might look like, that gives you just a little bit more buying power. Hopefully it's better pricing with better unit prices going through. So I think that there's like I am a fan of wholesale, I'll be frank. I probably would have led TWOOBS down a different journey there, where I might have taken you everywhere in the hope that that meant that everyone might be wearing TWOOBS. For example, because we've hung out with you guys a couple of times now, I keep looking at your website and I keep thinking, like, am I a TWOOBS wearer or am I not? I don't think I am, because I'm a bit more of a classical dresser. And then I keep coming back to them thinking, but what if they're super comfortable? What if I love them and like wear TWOOBS forever, right? But because I can't try a pair on, I'm not a TWOOBS buyer then, because I haven't had the power of playing with it in my hand. So I think there's an upside and a downside for both. Really interesting conversation though.
Yeah, and I think that what you said there, you hit the nail on the head, that like it's a marketing expense, it's a marketing cost. And I think that that's the most important thing, is to go into it with eyes open, that this is a marketing cost, because then you can weigh it up with how else could you be spending that marketing budget. We never had anyone say that to us. And so we were just like, well, this is a really shitty way to sell shoes, you know? But actually being able to look at it, like you said, they're like, well, you have to spend 150 grand here, and you have to, you know, and whatever it is, you can actually budget that and be like, how else could we spend this money? Maybe this is the best way that we can spend it, or maybe it's not.
And also just on the piece around, you know, it helps you produce more. It absolutely does. And I guess once we became more serious about our approach to the environment, really that was such a big decider in it, which was that it is no longer TWOOBS' mission to produce more. You know, we want to greater our impact, but not necessarily the volume that we're doing. So that really had to come into play there. And I think after 2 years, we definitely saw a lot of reward from the marketing side, and then ultimately decided that it didn't speak to our values anymore. But that's just from the TWOOBS perspective.
No, I love that as well. And it's a really relevant conversation right now that we sit here in the, you know, towards the tail end of 2024, that the cost to acquire a customer has become so prohibitive when you look at the Mark Meta engine, that there is, I suppose to some extent, a lot to be said for simply having a more profitable business model, whatever that looks like. So for some brands, that's, well, don't scale for the sake of scaling. You know, like I talk about Infamous Swim a lot, and I'm so sorry to Gemma and her team, but it's a classic example of a brand that got excited about Meta, put too much into it, scaled massive revenues, but made made losses as opposed to millions in profit. And I think the ego attached to scaling for the sake of scaling, especially in fashion, is absolutely real for brands. And I love that you guys are basically saying no to that. And I suppose the beauty of what you're doing at TWOOBS is that you've retained all of the margin yourself. It's more important to you, from the sounds of it, to maintain full margin on the product, sell less of them, but be more profitable, and perhaps drive yourselves a little less rigorously, that really just make us all fucking exhausted and tired and overwhelmed and constantly worried about cash. So it's a different approach, and who's to say that isn't actually the smartest of all of it?
Yeah, and I think that something that's come for us over the last few years is part of the way that we measure our success is also like what we're creating. So it's the environmental impact, but it's also the people impact, and it's the workplace that we've created for right now 8 women, and, you know, hopefully a lot more to come. And they work a 4-day week on full-time pay. I don't know if Jess talked about that at the conference, but
it's one of the things I want to talk about.
Yeah.
I didn't. I put it in the email.
Yeah. And something that we've had to bring in through that is that we've had to really work to the 80-20 principle. Like we don't bite off more than we can chew. We say no to way more than we say yes to, because we care about what we're creating, and we care about the people that we're creating it with. And the fact that people just fall over themselves to come and work with us, and the way that the people that we work with talk about working with us, and this safe and happy environment that we've created, is a really key part of TWOOBS. So the values of environment and the people and the shoes and the profit, it's all so genuinely woven in together that we just see this as the future of business. And we've found in ourselves that we can't shut off to parts of ourselves and parts of what we're creating. And I think that that's probably the old, more patriarchal way of doing business. Like we actually want to be feeling really good about what we're creating. And we can only do that by really considering all parts of it.
I love that. And it's, you know what, it speaks to the ethos of what your brand stands for as well. I like that it's a match across the board there. I want to talk about so many things. I need to come back to a couple of things, but while we're here, let's talk about sustainability for a moment, because I'm really cognizant that your brand is a vegan, sustainable brand, but your branding itself hasn't gone down the traditional eco route. It's playful and colorful, and I love it. It's really, I suppose it's what the brand is. It's quirky and fun and playful, but yet, you know, so many eco brands go down the straight natural colors route. And I'd love to know, and also the B Corp certification. I want to talk about that too, but maybe you can tell us a bit about how that's worked for the brand.
Yeah, sure. So an interesting fact about TWOOBS is that we launched it as a vegan brand, but in the beginning, in 2016, it was so uncool to be vegan, so we didn't tell anyone. And for the exact reason that you're saying, you know, because the words vegan kind of brought to mind hemp and brown and, you know, not kind of cool fashion, which is ultimately like what we are here to create. And I think that we absolutely love, like I'll talk for myself, like I love fashion. I am a magpie. I like everything colorful. I like maximum texture, like texture on texture on texture on texture is my jam. Like I absolutely love it. And I really care about the environment. And I feel that those are such opposing things in my being, and they're things that I have had to reckon with, of like, how can I love fashion and adore pretty things and love getting dressed up, and also like deep in my being recognize what the climate crisis means for humanity, animals, and the world. And really that's what TWOOBS speaks to, is this kind of dichotomy in all of us where, yes, all of these things are happening, and we love to have fun, and we love to play, and we love to dress up, and we love to seek joy, and all of these things. And I think that something we talk about a lot at TWOOBS is that the climate crisis has a PR problem. And I think that sustainable fashion and veganism probably also does, which is that...
I completely agree with you.
Yeah, it's like, it's not just for the eco warriors, it's actually for all of us. So how can we speak to that? And that's what we really try to do at TWOOBS, not just in terms of our product, but also in the way that we speak about these really hairy, scary issues in ways that hopefully our audience finds quite palatable, interesting.
Yeah, not repelling. It's interesting, isn't it? Like, I agree with you. And I almost feel like, having had a pretty significant eco business myself, I do feel like there's a bit of a negative spin around environmentally responsible businesses. And I almost feel like you have to be a little bit like woo ha ha, where you're like catching them on the fashionable fun stuff, but they just happen to be getting this layer where it's like sucked in, I got you, it's sustainable too. That's kind of like how I approach it. And one of the things that always disappointed me a little in my nappy brand was that, you know, we did deep customer polling. We did a lot of, for example, we would go to all the baby expos every year, take, 10 people, and fuck, if I never go to another baby expo again, it'll be too, they are the worst. But the really powerful thing that happened at those is we got to deeply poll our audience. And, we set about making eco originals because we assumed that everybody wanted an environmentally friendly option as a disposable nappy. And it's just not fucking true. What they wanted was a product that would be healthier for their babies' vaginas and penises. And they wanted it to be easy and disposable. And then maybe eco is like further down the list, like 0.4 or 5 out of their list of their things that they were looking for. So I do feel like, as a eco brand, it's fabulous to have the aspiration as the business owner and have it as a pillar of what your integrity stands for. But I don't always know if it actually sells in the same way that it maybe should. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you were all browns and naturals, you probably wouldn't even be a fraction of the size of the business you are right now. And I reckon you're nailing it on a playful, kind of fun perspective that just happens to be good.
Thank you.
How about the certified B Corp? Like, I know it's a massive job to get it. I would love to do it for SheCon, but I just don't have the energy to even approach it. If you had to do it, would you do it again? Has it been a positive experience for you guys?
I think that it was weird that TWOOBS didn't have it is more how we felt about it. Like it got to the point, Stephanie and I had identified that we wanted TWOOBS to be B Corp years and years before we actually got it. But I think that if you wanted, or if we wanted to be an environmentally focused brand that stood for really kind business, it needed to be B Corp. That's really how we felt. And I still feel that way. It was a beast to do. But honestly, now that we've done it, I feel like, you know, when something's really complicated from the outside, but then once you're in it, you're like, oh, hang on a second. I kind of understand how this works now. So one thing I said to Stephanie was like, oh, now that I know how it works, like I really want to help some of our friends get B Corp, because in hindsight, the process I think is actually much easier. Whereas I remember 2 years ago being like, oh my God, this is a beast. How are we ever going to get this? I definitely think that we haven't dipped into enough of the benefits of having B Corp. Like they have an amazing community. They have, you know, they run events. Actually, we're going to, I don't know if you want to come with me to this, but we're going to our first B Corp catch up in Byron in a couple of weeks. And so there are things like that that I don't feel like we've necessarily taken advantage of. We kind of got it, we ticked the box, and then we moved on. But I think there's a lot more to do once we have it now that we only now starting to play in.
Yeah, and I think from a brand perspective, we haven't done anything with it. But I actually just got back from 2 months traveling overseas. And the first place I went was, I was in Peru, and we were hiking in the Andean mountains in the middle of nowhere. And we had this local Peruvian guide who'd lived his whole life around this area that's kind of like a few hour drive away from Machu Picchu, just to give you a sense of how remote it was. And we were sitting there having lunch, literally no one around for kilometers and kilometers. And he was talking about businesses, and I happened to mention, oh, I have this shoe business, and you know, it's environmentally focused and whatever. And he was like, oh, yes, I've heard that like these businesses get this thing called B Corporation. And I was like, oh yeah, we're a B Corp. And he was like, oh, you're a B Corp? And I was just like, this man had, you know, grown up in the Andean mountains. He's works in hiking. Like, you know, he had no idea of what TWOOBS was or any Australian brand. But the fact that I mentioned that we're a B Corp and that meant something to him, I feel like that tells me there's something really, really special in it. I just don't know how we're going to tap into that quite yet, but we'll figure it out.
Well, I guess I'm curious. I love that share. I'm curious if you guys sell globally, because I think the real benefit too of B Corp is if you go into the US, for example, that it's so recognized and it might open a lot more doors over there for you guys. Like, are you going global? Like, where do you currently sell? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We actually were just chatting about this over lunch before. We have been testing the US for the last couple of years. We ran some meta tests, and we had awareness that the US is such a big market. Jess and I actually lived in LA when we launched TWOOBS, so 8 years ago now. And we knew that that is such a big market that we need to find niches within the market. And with our testing, we found that LA and New York, no surprise, were the two pockets, particularly Brooklyn and New York. Those were the two pockets that were the easiest to sell in. So we actually narrowed it down for ourselves to just LA, because we were like, let's start with one market. And that's been the market that we've been focusing on. We've been working with a celebrity gifting agency or a celebrity seeding agency. We've been running digital ads there. And it was so interesting because we haven't had much cut through. We've had, we've seen some sales, we've had some celebrities wearing them, but nothing significant. And I actually on this trip went to LA by coincidence, and I had a look around and I was like, there are billboards everywhere selling you everything in LA. Everyone is wearing like the hottest brands, the biggest brands in the world that have the biggest budgets. Everything is just massive in LA, and actually being there and having a felt sense again, even though I know LA so well, but being there, I was like, this is a really hard market to tap into. And then I went to London where, I've spent a lot of time as well. And, you don't think of London as a sandal kind of place. It's not summer there for very long. But I actually looked around and I was like, well, they still wear sandals in summer. They're going to buy a pair of sandals when it's hot. we don't just do sandals anymore. And I could really see how, you know, the UK is much more a word of mouth market. They like more boutique things, like, and I could see how the style is more tubes. So just to say, this is something we're figuring out at the moment, but it's interesting to stay open and to not always just go, you know, we were like, well, we know LA, we've lived in LA, it's summer all year round in California, pretty much, that makes sense. But really like digging deeper and running tests and not getting caught in our idea of what we need our overseas expansion to look like, I think is where we're at the moment.
Yeah, I love that. And also checking in on other labels that have successfully done the, you know, the journey into selling in the US well. You know, I interview a lot of brands here on the podcast, and some brands have entered and exited again quite quickly because it hasn't worked. And then there's an understanding that it's actually okay just to master Australia and to be okay with that as a revenue goal without needing other markets that are more complex, because a little bit like bricks and clicks are, so is Australia versus USA. It's a completely different beast. It requires different levers, and even the languaging and their color appetite, all of it is different in other markets. So I think that's where I, you know, would lean. Even in Byron, you guys have epic brands who've navigated it, the transatlantic crossing, you know, like the girls from the Beach People, you know, they've really grown into the US. They're in Byron and they're fabulous women. So I think there's probably lots of conversations. That's where I would go in trying to understand how you could leverage off the power of them. At the end of the potty, I'll hook you up with someone else who I think can help you too. Remind me. I'd love to circle back now. Early in the podcast, we were talking about the New York Fashion Week early in the days. And we mentioned that in your conversations with my team, you were saying that in the first few years, things didn't move quickly. And now over at TWOOBS, you guys are like 100% year on year, which is epic and amazing. But like in the early days, you weren't. And I want to know, like, in hindsight, why? Why wasn't it growing quickly? And then what did you do to make the shift? Because I know everyone listening wants to know the answer to this question.
It's a great question. There are probably many things. And one of them that we often talk about is that we are long-term relationship people. We are commitment people. We once interviewed Erin Brockovich for our podcast, and she told us this word her mum used, which is stick-to-itiveness. And I think that, you know, sticking to it has been one of the secret sources of TWOOBS. And we saw so many people that were starting brands around the time that we were. And it wasn't that we were anywhere that they weren't a few years in, but it was that they didn't have the grit to just stick it out. And a lot of them gave up. And so I think that it can be quite disheartening that for me, I used to love consuming startup stories and success stories. And they're usually the ones that are like overnight successes. Like we used to look at Frank Body. We used to look at the Daily Edited. We used to look at Triangle Swim back in the day. And those were the stories that we really looked up to. And we felt like that there was something wrong with our brand and there was something that we were doing wrong when we weren't seeing that same quick success that they were seeing. And that would be the biggest advice I would give to myself back then. We also got a lot of criticism. Like you said, a lot of people didn't believe in what we were building. We had some really well-known business people. Like if I told you their business, you'd be like, oh yeah. We had mentors say to us,
you guys are great and all, but shoes isn't it for you.
Yeah, I think you guys will build something amazing, but I don't think it'll be this. And so we were really like, and those are influential people that you look up to. And so we had to have a lot of stick-to-itiveness to get through that, but we really backed ourselves and we really believed in it. But ultimately, I think we could have been selling dog collars. I don't think it was about what we were selling. I think it was just keeping on going with it. So many times we would just get existential and be like, oh, maybe we should like change them to shoes that you could like extend like a platform onto it and then take it off. And, you know, maybe it's the product.
That's a shocking idea.
And actually, when you look at our product now to our product then, we invented the OG. It's why it's called the OG. We invented it in our first collection. It honestly looks pretty much the same, but it's the brand and the story and everything that we've created around it that's really been like one building block on top of the other that's created it into what it is today.
Can I honestly tell you that was the perfect answer, by the way? And I suppose it's a perfect answer in that what you said is actually quite a simple approach and it matches 1000% with my absolute belief for success. I suppose I've had 7 companies and this is my 3rd multi-million-dollar brand, and I interview women, like more than 100 incredible women have I interviewed on my podcast and on stages. And sometimes I sit and I have to like frame up, like, what's the thing that makes someone successful or not successful? And I 1000% agree with you. And it's grit and determination. That's actually it. It's holding fast. For me, it's also about pivoting when you need to pivot and being open to constantly, I suppose, going down this route of like, okay, that didn't work, go here. But it's holding fast to the same concept of success and never, ever, ever fucking giving up. And so many women drop off because it gets difficult, or they face a hurdle and they think, no, fuck it, I'm going to go back to get a job or whatever it might be. And I'm with you. I sometimes look at super successful brands and I think it's just a fucking widget. It's actually not really about what they sell. It's about their commitment to the journey and never giving up. That means that eventually they get there. And, at SheCom Live recently at our conference, I don't know if you caught this one, Jess, on the stage, but we had Danny from Kalani Kinis, and her presentation was amazing. She's a really... Their story at Kalani Kinis is incredible. Guys, go check them out. It's a swimwear brand. But, they do many, many, many tens of millions a year in revenue now. I won't tell you the number, but it's huge. And they didn't for a really long time. They're 14 years into their journey. And for 7 years, it was fucking hard work. It was just the 2 of them. And they just really struggled to get traction. And then just by never giving up and committing to what they were trying to achieve, now they have 90 staff and this massive business. And I think if I asked her the same question, it would be a similar answer to you. It was just holding fast. It was never not thinking that they were going to get the success that they needed to. It wasn't like, oh, well, I put more money into ads, or it wasn't like one fucking thing that was a lever. And I think whatever the exact strategies were that you executed on there, the overarching one is just believing and never giving up. I love that so much.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't catch the Kalani Kinis, but I wonder, does she have a co-founder in that brand?
She does. There's a husband and wife. Yeah, awesome. There's 2 of them.
Because I think that definitely has hugely been a part of why Stephanie and I have stuck to it. And definitely some of our other friends who have started businesses around the same time as us and then eventually fell away when it was too hard. It was a lot of like lone soldiering. And for us, it was never lone soldiering. Like we were in the victories together, we were commiserating together. And if one of us was going to give up, it meant the other one had to too. And that feels, like I can give up.
Accountability too, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to give up because then that means Stephanie has to give up and she's not ready to give up, and there's like really something in that. When you have someone in it with you, I think.
Right. You can prod each other on the days that the other one's having a shit day. You're like, no, I will not let you give in to this today. Get the fuck up.
Yeah. Or in our case, it's more like, oh, okay, you're at 0. Cool. Don't worry. I've got us for a while, and it's been great like that because definitely like we ebb and flow in the passion and the enthusiasm we have for the business. And usually it's the other one who's like, okay, cool. Like if you're not that inspired right now, like I got us for a while, like go do your thing.
I love that. And I just want to share for our listeners that are suddenly despairing that there's only one of them in the business. I can tell you how to solve this. So I also co-founded my nappy brand with a co-founder. Unfortunately for me, that was my husband at the time who we were in a terrible domestic violence cycle. So that was actually not a good thing. That was him leaning on me a lot and me doing most of the work and him claiming all the glory. So I think there's negative ways to have a co-partnership happening. It sounds like you guys have a really beautiful and healthy and harmonious relationship in that space. But I do have seen quite a few journeys where the co-founders or even 3 founders can make a huge difference. And I want to share for our listeners how I solved that in SheCom. And that is that for the first year or 2, I did do it on my own, but I had an amazing team around me. And then about 12 months ago now, I realized that what I needed was like a co-founder, but I didn't want to give 50% of my brand to someone else. So what I did was I brought in an executive team that I call my honchos or my she leads team. They were all gifted a percentage in the company in return for being my management team. And so there's actually 3 of them. And one is my chief of sales, one of my chief of programs, and one of my chief of marketing. And the 4 of us, we jam constantly, like daily. We have WhatsApp groups, and they are the ones I now lean on. So anything that needs to be changed in the business, we all make the decision together, even though ultimately, I still own 90% of the business and I'm the CEO. I actually lean on them for their thoughts and their feelings, and they cover me when I have leave. One of them's an acting CEO, and they're like, go and have a fucking holiday, girl. We've got this shit, right? So I feel that for a business owner, there needs to be something. It could be like what else we do at SheCom is a community, you know, with mentoring programs, and they all bounce off each other inside of that. I feel you need something, because hell knows you don't get to go to your husband or families or parents or girlfriends that you went to school with, because most of them think you're a fucking idiot putting all your life savings into an e-commerce business. Am I right? Don't take advice from them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So good. So there's solvable parts to that, but I love that that accountability piece is really important. Now, guys, we're running out of time. So I want to ask one final question for this podcast, which is around a really interesting story that happened to you since you started the company. I'd love to just know, like, I know we've touched on a couple. So on the podcast, guys, there's always one question I love to end with, and that's around success and what that looks like for you. And to set the context, I feel a lot of shecompreneurs drive ourselves relentlessly, and we whip ourselves into a frenzy of always moving through to the next goal, to the next goal, to the next goal, without ever really stopping to smell the roses. And we fucking hardly ever congratulate ourselves when we do reach a goal. So I want to know, when will you know that you're successful with TWOOBS?
I definitely think that we are super guilty of everything that you just said. Like, at no point, we have reached so many milestones and like so many of our goals that we set out to with TWOOBS. And at probably less points than I could count on one hand have we actually stopped to be like, wow, we did that thing, you know, like because it never feels like enough, to be honest. Like, there's always another payroll coming around the corner. There's always another, you know, sustainability piece that we'd really love to implement into the business. I think that something that Stephanie and I have done, though, that's been really helpful for this is our identity for a very long time was strongly tied to our work. And whether it was How to Live Work, which was the blog that we were doing before TWOOBS, or whether it was the earlier days of TWOOBS, you know, we took it to heart. Like, if TWOOBS had a loss, it was Jess and Stef's loss, and it was so serious.
If TWOOBS' post on Instagram didn't get enough likes, Jess and Stef weren't getting enough likes.
Yeah, exactly right. And so for really very many years, our worth, not only our identity, our worth was tied to the success of this business. And over the last probably 5 to 6 years, we've done a lot of work to like get really strong in who we are, get really clear about our own values and what's really important to us. And so now I would say our worth and identity is not at all tied to this business. So it's not so much to say that, I guess, our life success is not required to be the success of the business. They are two very separate things.
And I think, like, you know, the joke that you can tell a woman's in her 20s because her bookshelf is full of rom-coms, but a woman in her 30s, it's full of self-help books. I think that that's the case for us, is that, you know, we found people like Brene Brown. We found people like Tara Brach, the meditation teacher. We found all these, you know, amazing new ways of being, and that's how we've like connected into our self-worth without it being tied into the business. And like you said earlier, like, a lot of bad decisions come out of ego. Like, there's, we would run 100 stores, or to be in department stores all around the country if our ego was driving the ship. But this way we get to keep our egos in check, and we get to be like, that's just our ego. We don't need to derive our self-worth from this. Come back to ourselves, whether it's a yoga session or a meditation or, you know, any of these things. And then we get to come to the business and be like, well, this is fun. What do we want to do? What's the best decision here? Rather than tying our own self-worth into it, it's actually what's made, ironically, our business so much more successful, because we're able to make the best decision for the business and not for ourselves.
And I think also, just on that, like, there are micro successes and micro failures that happen multiple times throughout the day at TWOOBS. Like there are so many wins and so many losses. And if our worth and identity was strongly tied to that, whoa, would our internal worlds look absolutely crazy. But it's really just like a celebration of all that we have done and all that we are doing. And like, okay, like that sucks when the losses happen, but that's all part of the journey.
You guys are like so ridiculously sage and wise, and I freaking love everything you're saying, but that is like the best answer anyone's ever given me on the podcast. And I'll tell you why. It's because I fundamentally agree with you, because so many people assume that their business is them. And I have to say to myself all the time, I am not my business and my business is not me. And it's because the minute that the business, like you said, my fortnightly payroll net before super, before PAYG, it's like 35 grand a fortnight at the moment. It makes me vomit in my right?
It's like you think you're cash rich, and then like one payroll comes around and alas, you are cash poor.
Right. But what I have to say to myself is I look around my home and my life is so abundant. My husband and I are comfortable. We have like plenty of money in our savings account. We live a beautiful life. I have a rich marriage with an amazing man who loves me dearly. We have dogs and kids and holidays. And I think, fuck, do not let that shit impact your mental health, Lisa. Like that is a business and the business will be around in a few years or it won't, but it's not you. Like, right. There's like has to be a detachment or a death of ego from the business. The success is mine. And I think because I'm also with you, it's hard to practice, but it's really important to master because so many women get stuck in this. And this is probably like literally one of the biggest mistakes I see women make. A, they give up too early, which we've already touched on to do with ultimate belief in success. But B, they really live those frenetic entrepreneurial roller coasters that happen every day. And it's every time there's an up and then down. And it's like, that is exhausting. And I know because I've lived it for 14 years and 7 companies. If you let that shit be your own emotional world, like you're going to have a burnout and you're going to like not have enough resilience to deal with what a business serves up every day. So we love that share so, so, so much. And maybe we could all just surmise for the last piece of this potty to the beautiful listeners right now that success for all of you should look like detaching from your ego, the success of your business and the cash flow of your business and its wins and its losses. It's not you. You're still you. You still have a family and all the other things that happen around you. And there'll be other businesses. It's not the only thing you're here to do. And I think there's a correlation between full blown it's going to succeed and it not also pulling me down.
Absolutely.
Beautiful, guys. It's been amazing having you on the podcast today. I love your story and can't wait for an actual catch up in person soon. I'll have to come down to Byron and we'll go and have some nice lunch somewhere.
Oh, yes, please. Amazing. Would love that. Thank you so much. This is really fun.
Pleasure.